Welcome back, guys. We have a fantastic episode for you today. I know I say that every week. However, I actually wouldn't release a podcast episode if I didn't think it was fantastic. But today is a little bit special. It's not very often that I come across a compound that I think that just about everybody could benefit from. And I say just about because, of course, if you have medical issues or whatever, you're always going to want to check with your medical provider and make sure that whatever I'm talking about here, no matter how amazing it sounds, is right for you. That being said, this compound is phenomenal because it addresses mitochondrial function. And by now, if you've been a listener of this podcast, or if you're in this space at all, you know that the mitochondria really sit at the seat of our longevity, health span, and good function. So this is going to be amazing. But before we do that, I want to thank you guys, and I have a free gift for you. So number one, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in week after week. And thank you for helping us to rise up the ranks. We've been sitting in the top 5 ranking of our category for over a year now. And it's thanks to you guys. It's the explosive growth that we are seeing. And it's you sharing the podcast with your friends and bringing new listeners to the show and helping us to reach new people. So thank you so much for that. And of course, what's the freebie you say? She said she was giving us something for free. That's right. All you have to do is go to natniddam.com/top5 and you will get a list with an explanation of my top 5 peptide choices. There's some bioregulators in there. There's some longer chain peptides. Check it out and let me know what you think. All right. So if you have a minute today and you love this episode as much as I do, please make sure to go and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening to the episode on. And if there's anyone in your world that you think would also benefit from it, by all means, share it out. Now let's thank a couple of our sponsors and jump right in. Imagine your very own personal sunbeam, minus UV hazards, sunscreen, or chasing the right weather. Whether it's the height of summer where you are, and you're somewhere so hot it feels miserable to be outside for most of the day, or if you live somewhere like I do, where sadly, we're already feeling it winding down, and you're already dreading the winter blues, getting consistent, healthy light exposure can feel really tough. Now enter Mitolux sun lamps. We're going to talk about 2 different ones today. There's the Mitolux Lite and the Mitolux second generation. The Mitolux Lite is a lot like the Mitolux second generation. It just has it's a little bit leaner, if you will, in terms of what it offers. But both of them can be fired up for just a few minutes a day. It gives you UVB at 295 nanometers, which will naturally boost your very own vitamin D production. Plus, they'll both deliver red light for collagen and infrared for recovery. And you can do this while you're getting ready for your day in the bathroom or while you're answering emails, making breakfast. It's effortless. Now, this isn't just some flashy light panel. Both of them use light curve tech to mimic natural sun cycles, optimized wavelengths, zero UVA, and no bulbs to change ever. It's simple, safe, and designed for real results. You also have fireplace mode. So most people think of Mitolux just to boost vitamin D production, which in and of itself would already make it totally worth it. But here's what's really cool. The fireplace modes now give you the option to use the lamp also while you're working, like I am, so that it offsets the artificial blue light from your computer. There's another mode called Gamma, which is amazing for the brain. So these little lamps that are about the size of an iPad, let's say, are so versatile and so incredibly amazing. So you'll get slightly different features between the two of them, but the basics are all there. So check it out. You can get 10% off whichever model you like. Just head on over to mitolux.com/nat10. Nat10 will automatically be applied at checkout to give you 10% off. Okay, today we're zooming in all the way into the mitochondria with neuroscientist and longevity researcher, Dr. Siobhan Mitchell. Siobhan shares her personal mission to prevent brain aging after watching her grandmother struggle with Alzheimer's and how that led her to mitochondrial therapeutics. We unpack how mitochondrial decline starts as early as your 20s, how it relates to biological age, and why the molecule at the heart of MitoQ might just be the longevity insurance that your cells are craving. Now, if you decide at the end of this podcast that you just need to get your hands on some of this stuff and try it for yourself, you're going to want to go to mitoq.com and make sure to use code NAT when you check out, because that will save you some money off your purchase. All right, here we go. Let's talk about gut health. It's a key part of feeling your best, but are you giving your gut everything it needs? You might actually be overlooking something really essential: minerals. Minerals are one of the most overlooked contributors to a healthy gut. They help feed and support your microbiome. Research shows that good gut bacteria rely on essential minerals like calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, and phosphorus to thrive. The thing is that getting enough of these crucial minerals from food alone is getting pretty challenging these days, mostly because our food supply is challenged. Now, that's where Beam Minerals comes in. Beam Minerals makes supporting your gut health simple and effective. The liquid minerals are highly absorbable, so your body and your microbiome can easily use them. There's no digestion involved here. There's no capsules. All you need is a quick 1 ounce shot of Beam Minerals every morning. It tastes like water, so there's no weird surprises there. And if you even pick up a tiny taste, you can throw them in your coffee and your shake, anywhere. They're so easy to take. And there's also a bonus feature. Beam Minerals can even make probiotics more effective. Now, if you want to give them a try for yourself, what I would describe as the easiest, most effective supplement you could ever take, just head on over to beamminerals.com and use code NAT20 for 20% off your first order and give your gut the simple support it deserves. Siobhan Mitchell, welcome to the podcast. It is a pleasure to have you here bright and early in your morning.
Thank you. It is almost dawn in New Zealand right now, so I'm very awake.
Yeah, no, you are. I'm impressed. When we started our conversation, guys, before recording, it was actually pitch black behind Siobhan. And now I can see there's daylight breaking. So she has gotten up extra early for us. And I'm super grateful because I'm really excited about this conversation. Obviously, whenever we're going to talk about mitochondria these days, it's a happy day. So this has been your career. You're all about the mitochondria. As a matter of fact, you even worked on another mitochondrial compound that people talk about quite a lot before you moved over to where you are now.
I've worked on many mitochondrial compounds, but yeah, there are definitely some, for instance, at Nestle, one of the companies I used to work for that I worked on medium chain triglycerides. I worked on pomegranate. I worked on many, many different things. So I could go on and on.
Yeah. So we can say that mitochondria is your jam, let's just say. So Tell us a little bit about, you've worked at big multinational companies that certainly in this space, people don't regard very highly necessarily because, they're in the world of making products that people will consume a lot of. And so sometimes we don't see those as the best products for human health. But what was your experience working with them in a way, because you're a scientist, you're like a celebrated scientist, and yet you find yourselves in these companies. Did you find that were their intentions basically good, but then they're just kind of limited? How did you find it?
All right. So I will just quickly give you a sense of how I got into these big food companies. And It started out with when I was a postdoc. And I got into a training grant on aging mechanisms. And this was at University of Washington. And it had all these kind of big longevity researchers like Brian Kennedy, like Matt Kaberlein. And we did a lot of work on understanding what are the basic causes of aging. For instance, calorie restriction. Why does calorie restriction work so well? And can we make calorie restriction mimetics to improve lifespan? So the idea is that no one's going to restrict calories, or you probably shouldn't do that to improve lifespan, but can you make a molecule that will do the same thing as calorie restriction? And so there's a lot of effort on that. And as I got more and more into the details, I just started thinking I'd plan to go into pharma and develop drugs. But now I felt like the real answer is through diet, lifestyle, to improve lifespan, and especially my area of interest, which is brain aging. So I became very convinced that we have to look at nutrition to improve lifespan and brain aging. And of course, if you're going to look at nutrition, why not look at these big, huge food companies? So I actually got recruited by Unilever to start up a whole brain aging nutrition program. And that was kind of great because they just kind of said, you know what, we want to develop things to help prevent brain aging. Go and do whatever you think makes sense. So it was really exciting.
That's
and they funded it very well. Yeah. And that is, I think, the beauty of it is these food companies can fund things extremely well. And so when I moved on to Nestle, it was even more funding. And what I really loved about Nestle was that they love mitochondria. They are really, really interested in mitochondrial function as a basic way to prevent aging, which I had believed in, way back during my postdoc. So that felt great. In terms of how they operate and bring something to market, it's maybe not as successful because they're kind of getting into a field that they don't understand as well as just making chocolate, coffee, etc. So that's, that's the real problem is just, what are they going to do to pivot to something that's, not causing diabetes, but is suddenly supposed to improve your diabetes or improve your brain. And the way they ended up doing it, you can probably see, is they start to buy supplement companies. So now they're in the supplement space, which I think they kind of keep very separate from the main company. And that makes a ton of sense. So they're figuring it out.
Yeah. Didn't one of them buy Pure Encapsulations?
Yeah, they're all buying all of them. Unilever bought Ollie. They're buying all the big name ones that maybe you don't realize, like they are now owned by Nestle or Unilever. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you this one question and then we're going to move on. In your experience, when they buy one of these companies, are they relatively hands-on or do they try to start to, because I know that in my space, when I was just a nutritionist back in the day, when I think it was Nestle, right, that bought Pure Encapsulations? Was it Nestle? Yeah. When Nestle bought Pure Encapsulations, everybody was like, well, that's the end of that. Like, we're done. It's just right off that brand it's over. But although there were a couple of changes that I think were unfortunate, because I think the Pure Encapsulations banner used to be, there was nothing in the capsule beyond the supplement. There were no fillers. There was no flow agents, none of that stuff. And that changed over time. Essentially, they're going to apply certain principles that just make them more profitable, not with the intention of changing the supplement kind of thing.
See, I don't know that kind of thing. So I actually do believe that they're trying to make high quality products and keep it very close to the pure encapsulation tenets. Just that they are trying to make it more profitable. They're probably using a lot of other things that they have in their toolbox, which makes sense.
Yeah. So, and economies of scale will be a thing, at some level. So there'll be some wins in there as well. Okay. Well, let's not talk about them. Let's go back to the topic at hand, which is about your work and mitochondria. So you started off really looking at longevity, even as a postdoc. Like that's been your area of focus. So what drove the pivot away from the big companies, because they're going to offer a certain degree of comfort, if you will.
Good funding, nice offices. So I really loved MitoQ the first time I even heard about it. So I was actually at Nestle and I was looking for mitochondrial molecules to help with brain function, metabolism, many things. And I looked up MitoQ and I just thought, like, this is it. This is so cool. Like, it's one of the first truly mitochondrially targeted supplements ever, right? So like they really engineered this to get into the mitochondria better than anything else on the market. And that really impressed me because that's really hard. I can tell you there's a lot of work trying to get stuff in the mitochondria and most of it doesn't get in, like including stuff like CoQ10, where it's like, that's supposed to belong in the mitochondria, but there's no transport system for it to get into the mitochondria very easily. And so it's just very, very little gets into the mitochondria overall, like maybe 10% of it compared to MitoQ, which is up to 95% will get into the mitochondria.
Okay, that's fascinating. So we're going to dive into that
sooner than I would have.
But I would have.
It's nice to be in a small company. I will say that you have a lot more power, and you get that feeling of like, I am making a difference. And
yeah, well, and you get to pivot faster, right? Like you get to, like, you don't have to get approval from 900 different levels of wherever. You can kind of sit with your board or whoever you're dealing with and say, okay, here's where we're going to go and here's why we're going to do it. And off you go, which is pretty fascinating. So was there anything in your personal life or your career that where this concept of health span like became personal, like where it became more than just a business thing, but it started to hit a bit more personally?
Oh yeah, from a really early age. When I was about 8, my grandmother came to live with us and she had developed Alzheimer's, and she was a very smart woman. She was one of the first people that ever got a bachelor's at Trinity College in Dublin, and she was very loving and we had a great relationship. But when she came to live with us, she could barely remember who I was. And it was horrible seeing her struggle and have that feeling of like something was wrong. Where was she? She couldn't remember. She kept asking the same things, who's here? Who are you? And it was just awful for me as an 8-year-old seeing that your brain could just completely just give up like that. And you could just erase yourself, still be kind of walking around trying to do things, but just not really be there anymore. And I just thought, like, this is never happening to me. Like, I will not let this happen to me. And so that became my whole passion in life of like, how do you prevent brain aging? How do you make it so that your brain is going to work your entire life? Because you're probably aware most of the neurons in your brain have to last an entire life. It's like one of the few places in your body that doesn't have a lot of turnover of cells. So you have to keep all those neurons working perfectly for 90, 100 years. Like, how is that done? So that's how I got into mitochondria as well, because the more I started to understand what's causing brain aging, the more I understood this is something to do with brain energy. So the way your neurons are using energy is, one of the most energetic places in the body is very important. And if there's any stress from using that energy, it can manifest as things like more amyloid production, more inflammation, all sorts of things that we know are really bad for the brain and cause cognitive decline.
Right. Okay. Well, that's pretty personal. So as you've just stated, mitochondria is critical to aging. So many people think of aging as, their skin, their joints, their heart, their, like the physical pieces. We often don't think of the brain, although I think that people who've had experiences like yours, it becomes painfully obvious that the brain is central. But so let's talk a little bit about mitochondrial decline, because I know that if you're going to target mitochondrial anywhere, it's going to affect all the mitochondria in the body. Like, even if you're focused on brain health, right? Like, I mean, you can't just say, I want to target the mitochondria in the brain. Your work is about mitochondria, period. So in terms of health span and lifespan, let's talk a little bit about how these mitochondria really affect the full system and why then they become a very upstream way of affecting aging positively, hopefully.
Yeah, well, I agree that people have trouble seeing mitochondria as the cause of their skin, getting wrinkles or their muscles no longer being as active and as strong. But everyone knows, for instance, that your muscles do start to decline and your exercise performance starts to decline in your 20s, right? So super early on in life. And research has really shown that that's due to lots of changes in mitochondrial function. So even in your 20s, your mitochondria are starting to show the first signs of aging, the first signs of like, we are no longer performing at our max. We can only get, for instance, a VO2 max of less than it used to be, at age 25. Like, now we're just going to decline and never really get back up to what we were in our 20s. And cognition is another example. So everyone is aware that, you will have cognitive decline probably a little bit by the time you're 90. What they're probably not as aware of is that, once again, in your 20s, things like reaction time start to go down and just go down and never come up again. And these are also linked to mitochondrial function. So there's a lot of things, especially in these brain, kind of like huge energy use areas, and, muscle, liver, heart are also kind of huge energy use areas where we see that mitochondrial function, once it starts to decline, like, you are going to have less heart function. And, even skin. So you brought that up, people are like, oh, it's wrinkling. That was due to UV, like too much sun or whatever. But if you think about it, like, what's actually causing a lot of that problem as well, too, is that the UV, the damage to your DNA is also damaging your mitochondria. Your mitochondria during that kind of dysfunction are sending out even more oxidative stress. And then your skin will start to age even faster. So for instance, we've seen with MitoQ that it can reverse some of skin aging. And so this is also proving that, mitochondrial function, if you target it, can actually improve things that you never would have thought of, like skin or joints. So, yep.
Yeah, though that's fascinating. I mean, I do think, someone who's not been in this space for very long is listening to this going, in my 20s, well, I may as well just throw in the towel. But I think that what we've also shown is that what it means, it's not that you're on this inexorable kind of inevitable downhill spiral, but I think what it does is it kind of amplifies the need to offset what would be this natural decline by making better decisions and by exercising and eating properly. And like you can kind of balance it out, because we see athletes inexplicably, right, who performed, like Roger Federer performed way past his best before date as a tennis player. There's basketball players, and some of these people are just exceptional specimens, but most of them are people that just work really hard at supporting their bodies. So, so I think both are true. And I think it'll be, I'm looking forward to diving into MitoQ, but tell me this so MitoQ is a brand name for a molecule called mitoquinol. Am I right about that? Mm-hmm. So how convenient, like what a great name, MitoQ. So is mitoquinol a natural compound that exists in nature, or is it something that's been engineered in a lab?
So it's based off of a natural compound. So when this was developed, so it really is actually completely artificial, it was engineered. The idea was that, as I explained, the mitochondria is really hard to get into. Like even back as a postdoc, it was like, what can we put into the mitochondria to help them work better? And it was really hard. So what these two scientists realized, Mike Murphy and Robin Smith at University of Otago at the time, was that if we can use this special tag, this triphenylphosphonium tag that is very positively charged, anything attached to this tag will get sucked up into the mitochondria, because the mitochondria is very negatively charged. It's the most negatively charged area of the cell. And so they thought, all right, great. That's great. We have this tag. What should we attach it onto? And they thought, well, what about CoQ10? Something that looks like CoQ10, because as we all know, CoQ10 is very important for mitochondria antioxidant function, but it decreases as you age, and it decreases during different kinds of diseases. And, many medications can also decrease it. So a lot of people are walking around with decreased CoQ10 and not even realizing it. And so what if this could kind of bring back all the kind of same protection and capability of CoQ10? So that's really what happened. They basically attached this tag on and used a sort of shortened form of CoQ10 and saw that, it could get into the mitochondria maybe up to 1,000 times better than CoQ10, just in terms of just having that tag being able to get in. And it's the only supplement in the market that has that kind of tag and has that ability. So it is truly unique. So it's sort of based off of natural things, but it has that little bit of an edge to it, a little bit of a tech.
That's so fascinating, because CoQ10 goes in there, and its claim to fame is it mops up reactive oxygen species, which are produced by the mitochondria in making energy.
Yes.
And so that is wow. I mean, I maybe should have known this before the episode, but I like to come to my podcast with a bit of a beginner's mind, so I don't shoot my mouth off too much. That is really fascinating. So it is essentially a version of CoQ10, but that's been modified so that it'll behave like CoQ10 in the cell, but that's been modified so that it can actually be uptake into the mitochondria is greatly enhanced. Is that right?
That is in a nutshell. No, you're right. I don't always like to say it's a version of CoQ10, because then people are saying, oh, it's like, Qnol. It's like the one that's a little bit more bioavailable. It's like, no, this bioavailability is different than any other CoQ10, because it is getting to the mitochondria in this phenomenal way. Any other version of CoQ10, whether it's a liposome, whether it's, joined to something else, will not have that ability. So your CoQ10 will probably help a lot of the rest of your cell in mopping up free radicals. But when it comes to your mitochondria, it's not doing the same job as MitoQ. MitoQ is way better. And we have data to show that.
That is so cool. And so PQQ falls into that too, right? Because a lot of people talk about PQQ as being a better version of CoQ10.
I mean, I don't know if I would say it's a better version. It does different things, and it has, like a sort of different place. And I actually tell people all the time, like, you should take MitoQ and PQQ. They're really helpful together. But yeah, PQQ is a mitochondrial antioxidant as well.
So let's talk about MitoQ supporting mitophagy, redox balance, inflammation in a way that's going to, because the community that a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are slightly obsessed. Would we say that, guys? Would you say that we are a little bit obsessed with reversing our biological age, whatever the heck that means? And I don't know what your thoughts are on biological aging, but I think it makes sense to me that, the chronological clock is going to continue to roll. Now, can we do something to slow down the aging of our cells? And can we repair them to a degree where we say, well, we're actually reversing our biological age? So that was a kind of multi-tiered question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just because of the fact that it's so good at decreasing oxidative stress, especially lipid peroxidation in the mitochondria, and also decreasing, for instance, DNA damage in the mitochondria, it has a lot of amazing downstream effects on longevity pathways. So things like sirtuins, it activates, sirtuins 1, 3, 6. It helps promote mitophagy. So basically kind of, getting the mitochondria that are not functioning as well to kind of start, turning over and getting kind of more in a sort of fresh status. It's also been shown to increase AMPK, which is another longevity pathway that's linked to, better metabolism and better blood glucose control. It's also linked to increasing NRF2, which is a well-known cell resilience pathway that is also something that helps with your overall hormesis, which is, I think you probably know that term, basically getting your cell ready or your whole body ready for, insults, for stresses, so that you can age better. And so what does this mean when it hits all these longevity pathways? Well, in terms of clinical studies, we've seen that, for instance, it helps make blood vessels act younger, up to 15 to 20 years younger in a clinical study of older people. So older people who are healthy, nothing really wrong with them, were given 20 milligrams of MitoQ for 6 weeks. Yeah. And they were shown to have basically better blood flow, so better response to sympathetic kind of like activation of their blood vessels. So you've heard of nitric oxide, right? And how you have to have nitric oxide released to get your vasodilation of your blood vessels. This is where it basically makes these blood vessels of these older people who are like, say, 70, now act like they're 50 in terms of how well they're being controlled in terms of vasodilation. And so this is, I think, great. But then, in terms of more traditional biological aging markers like aortic stiffness, so the idea that, no matter what happens to you, even if you're trying really hard, you probably will get more stiffening in your arteries. MitoQ is shown to actually decrease artery stiffness in 6 weeks as well, and also decrease oxidized LDL. So like the really bad form of LDL that's basically reactive, that's going to, start scarring your arteries and cause all sorts of
fundamentally cause
plaque. Yeah, exactly. So those are all, I think, the biological aging stuff that you can kind of concretely feel like that will make a difference. If you can keep your arteries clean, if you can keep it so that they're acting much younger and you're getting blood flow to everywhere that you should, including your brain and your muscles and your skin, like you will have less aging in those areas as well.
And so this mitoquinol actually helps with all of those things by affecting the mitochondria.
Yes.
Better elasticity in the blood vessels, less plaque deposition, less oxidized LDL. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So this is just even like a tip of the iceberg, because we have over 25 clinical studies published.
Hey, let's dig through the iceberg. Let's travel through the iceberg here. I'm pretty good. Well, and I think what's fascinating, I mean, this is really just kind of hitting our space right now. This compound, or this molecule, as it were, has been studied for 10 years. So you've got a lot of clinical trials here, and you even have human studies, which is so often lacking in in the latest, greatest, oh, look what we found. And we have this great brand and it's going to reverse biological aging, or it's going to hit the hallmarks of aging. And yet you have done all these human clinical trials, which is pretty fascinating. So let's travel along the iceberg a little bit. Let's crack the surface of the water. Let's go a little deeper.
Yeah. I would say, just to be clear, I'm going to talk about some things that are about disease. So these are just my opinions about what MitoQ does in terms of my interpretation of what's happening. But yeah, MitoQ has been shown in about 7 different clinical studies to help with all different kinds of heart disease conditions. So everything from hypertension to peripheral artery disease to congestive heart failure, even up to improving mitochondrial function in the white blood cells of people with congestive heart failure. So there's a lot of interest in heart health, but then we also have a lot of studies, up to 5 studies in just exercise performance. So as we just talked about, even when you're young, you're going to start to see a little bit of decline in your exercise performance, even if you're trying really, really hard, like Federer. Well, we can show that, especially if you are getting older, that MitoQ can improve exercise performance. So improve time trial performance. That's when you're cycling really hard for a certain amount of time. It increases power output. It also helps with muscle output as well too. And then even more interestingly, in young athletes, in just a shorter amount of time, so just 10 days, they showed that MitoQ could decrease DNA damage that is induced by intense exercise. So people aren't always aware that when you do really intensive exercise, you can actually damage your DNA, and that isn't always a good thing. So yeah, to put it lightly. So this is something that can kind of help protect you while you're exercising, so you get all the benefits of it. And so, for instance, it also helps decrease inflammation that's caused by intense exercise. So MitoQ's decreased F-isoprostanes and other types of inflammation. So all across the board, it's great for that. I could go on about immune function. I don't know where you want to go.
And that's a really important point that you've brought up, the immune function, because I think that the hallmark of a great mitochondrial supplement is that it will affect essentially every single system in the body.
Yes.
Because every system in the body is dependent on mitochondria for its very functioning and existence. And so as the mitochondria goes down, like what I talked about before, like people worry about their joints. Well, the mitochondria in the tissues around the joints start to get exhausted and they don't function as well. And so things don't repair as well. You lose flexibility, you lose resilience, let's say. And so, but that's going to also apply to immune system. So I think that, what's so fascinating about a good mitochondrial compound like this one is that it's going to impact every one of those major systems. So you've kind of almost transcended the hallmarks of aging and said, what we're really doing here is addressing that root cause of loss of energy in the mitochondria that prevents the body from doing what it's going to do. And then if on top of that, you're saying that it's giving enough energy that DNA damage is it prevented or is it repaired?
It's lessened. Yeah, you don't get that damage in the first place. Yeah.
So then that's a major hallmark of aging right there.
Yeah, exactly. It really does hit a lot of the hallmarks of aging, like telomere attrition and, nutrient sensing and all sorts of things in epigenetics. So it's really, I think, as you say, like this kind of all around wonder. So yeah, that's why I always try to tell people, it's like, even with the brain, people think, all right, go and find something that protects the brain. It's actually, you have to protect your heart so it can still give blood to the brain. You have to protect your pancreas so you can kind of have the right insulin sensitivity and the right blood glucose to the brain. And you have to protect the liver so it's getting rid of the toxins that can hurt the brain. So it's all connected. So it's really great to have a molecule like this that I think has so much of that protection. Like if we have clinical trials in liver function, for instance, as well as immune function. And what I think is really interesting is that people know about the mitochondria as like the powerhouse of the cell, and that is one of the main jobs, but it's also really important for innate immune responses and inflammation. So for instance, we have a trial where people who were exposed to COVID through a family member were given MitoQ and actually shown to have less infection, like subsequent infection of COVID. And if they did get infected, like less symptoms, because MitoQ, through basically helping modulate the mitochondrial kind of like inflammation response, could actually dampen cytokine storms that would lead to, these kind of crazy, huge symptoms that, we can all know about, like ending up in the hospital because you had the cytokine storm that made it so you couldn't breathe very well. So yeah, I think this is what's really interesting about something like MitoQ. Yeah.
Okay. Well, now that you've brought up the C word, I have to ask, have you done any work on long COVID, on people who are struggling? Because so many people talk about long COVID essentially being a mitochondrial, it's like this residual mitochondrial damage from however it is that they got to the spike protein, which we don't need to discuss, but that it's about the mitochondrial damage. Have you done any studies on long COVID that?
There are studies going on right now. So we have a study in long COVID that we're hoping to get results soon. But we've had a lot of anecdotal, customers saying that it really helped with their long COVID. We do have a study with chronic fatigue syndrome showing that MitoQ could help that. But I especially feel like long COVID is going to be a much more serious problem than people realize, because it probably is something where the virus or the inflammation is sort of just staying in the brain long term and affecting even things like risk of cognitive decline over long term. There's been a lot of studies showing that, IQ points are lost if you're having too much long COVID for too long. So it just really needs to get resolved. And I'm very excited about MitoQ as being a possible way to do that.
And you mentioned that it affects mitophagy possibly. I didn't mean possibly, I meant positively. Can you go into that a tiny bit? Because mitophagy is another big buzzword in the mitochondrial world, right? Because we have all these mitochondria. Some of them are not pulling their weight. They're a little bit damaged. They're kind of like a little bit like, we get probably mitochondrial senescence, essentially, like these grumpy old men not doing their work and making everybody else's life miserable. Can you talk a little bit about how MitoQ might be helpful in that mitochondrial turnover that you talked about?
Yeah, sure. So what's interesting about MitoQ is that it helps kind of, I would say, balance out the mitochondrial membrane. So it can decrease it a little bit when, for instance, the mitochondria start to get overactivated. So for instance, I don't know if you know a lot about the physiology of the mitochondria, but the membrane potential of the mitochondria kind of basically tells you how much ATP it can make and kind of, how active it is. So mitophagy is basically when you start to get these signals like pink and parkin, which MitoQ actually has been shown to stimulate, being turned on, because the feeling is like, oh, this mitochondria is no longer working as well, right? So it's starting to show a little bit of weird behavior. And so, as we know, that's really great actually for a mitochondria, because as soon as you start to have that turnover, so getting rid of the old proteins, making new proteins, fixing all the membranes, that's immediately going to make your mitochondria work better for longer. So I think this is a really important function in terms of brain. I know there's a lot of other types of molecules out there that work for mitophagy that have kind of better cognitive improvement from long-term use. And so we're actually very excited. We have 2 trials in what I would say kind of cognitive decline areas that we are waiting to see the sort of results of. So so mitophagy, I think, is a hot area, especially also for lifespan.
Yeah, lifespan, healthspan. Yeah. In that whole, and you had mentioned earlier about caloric restriction, how it's fundamentally not practical for most people, which is true. I mean, you have the tiniest slice of the population that are good at restricting their calories long term, but they are the tiniest slice of the population. And sadly, for most of the rest of the population, it's not even that I think it's not even so much that people are eating appropriate calories, but that we have a tendency to overeat, at least in North America, at least in the countries in first world countries where people are fortunate enough not to have to worry about starving. We're not in a space where people they overeat. It's not even a question of can you undereat? It's could you even get to a place where you're appropriately eating? And this overconsumption of food will put strain on the whole system, including mitochondria.
Yeah, for sure. So it's really well known that obesity, fat accumulation can overtax mitochondria. So to the point where, especially in places like the liver, for instance, when the liver starts to accumulate fat, this basically causes mitochondria to not run as well, right? So they can't generate as much ATP. They cause a lot more inflammation than they normally do. And then you have liver dysfunction, you have fatty liver syndrome, that kind of stuff. And then, this is also something that can be systemic as well, too. So just
for sure,
fat accumulation, especially visceral fat, you're probably very aware of, can have this effect. It was really interesting, actually. So there was a study with MitoQ in pre-diabetics. So they didn't actually have diabetes yet, but they were overweight. They gave like a fat challenge to them. So they basically gave them a huge amount of fat into their systems that was trying to replicate having like a huge fatty meal, like a huge cheesecake or something like that. And even just that kind of one bolus of fat can start causing insulin resistance, right? So this is sort of like the very start of when insulin starts to not work as well, and you're not pulling in as much glucose into your cells. And what they showed was that when you put MitoQ on board with these people getting this lipid challenge, they could still maintain correct kind of glucose transport into their muscle cells. So it was interesting because this is something where, it's showing that, these big, huge meals that are all fat laden can cause this insulin resistance even a little bit, over time. But something like MitoQ can kind of like step in and kind of keep things going better because of the fact that it helps deal with all the oxidative stress that the mitochondria is undergoing that leads to insulin resistance. So I thought that was really cool.
Whenever I can trade supplements for consuming nature's longevity compounds straight from a food source, you guys know I am all in. Extra virgin olive oil is one of those food sources. But it's not just any olive oil. I'm talking about fresh pressed, high polyphenol olive oil that actually tastes alive. That's what you get with the Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Club. We all know how much drama is happening in the olive oil industry. Now, TJ Robinson, aka the Olive Oil Hunter, travels the world sourcing the freshest, most nutrient-rich oils and ships them directly from each new harvest. No middlemen, no shelves, just pure flavor and nutrition. I drizzle it on everything. Eggs, avocado toast, even in smoothies. Sometimes it's that good. Sometimes I'll even take a teaspoon all on its own. And I always make my own salad dressing with fresh pressed extra virgin olive oil. Now, here's the deal. You can try a $39 bottle for just $1 shipping. No catch. No subscription required. You get your free $39 bottle for just $1 shipping and get to taste the difference that freshness makes for yourself. All you have to do is go to getfreshlongevity.com. That's getfreshlongevity.com for a free bottle, and all you pay is $1 shipping. And might I repeat, no subscription required. Once again, that's getfreshlongevity.com. So in a person who's not overeating or who's trying to manage their diet, let's say, are you seeing, or would it be appropriate to say that in a world where someone is working to regain their metabolic flexibility, that something like mitoquinol might be helpful in reestablishing metabolic flexibility? I'm not going to say that it's going to fix it, but right? I mean, if somebody's overeating all the time and those boluses become a daily event, I mean, maybe taking MitoQ is going to help to manage the damage a little bit, but you're still not going to be in good shape over the long term.
I think this is exactly what I picture MitoQ doing. So it's just helping with a little bit of that metabolic flexibility, helping keep your mitochondria able to deal with some of these insults that are happening. And I could go on about, the way that it helps mitochondria deal with all sorts of insults, from toxins in the environment.
Bring it.
Yeah.
We're here for it. So bring it on, because this is before we started recording, this is something we were talking about, right? That very often people will say, there's just so many supplements. Like, why do we need so many supplements? We should be getting everything from food, and we shouldn't need all these supplements. And Yeah, we shouldn't.
I wish.
And
Yeah.
we should be able to get it from food. But the truth of the matter is that the world that we live in today has very little for most of us, bears very little relationship to the world that our bodies evolved to thrive in. Right. And
Yes.
so, and I think what's really exciting about something like what we're talking about today is this is almost a compound for this new world that we're forced to live in. And maybe let's talk a little bit about some of these assaults that are not normal. Like they're not supposed to be there.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I think this is what's so frustrating about modern life is that, the longevity field in itself, like we've done such a good job about understanding exercise and diet and, trying to get all the nutrients we can from a whole food diet and decreasing stress, helping with our sleep. But we haven't really thought enough about all the toxins in the environment that we can't control, no matter what. So, we saw a few summers ago with the wildfires. It's like, if you live in an area with wildfires, you're just going to get exposed to a lot of air pollution and there's nothing you can do. Well, maybe there is something you can do. So, for instance, there was a study, this is preclinical because you couldn't give air pollution to humans. But for mice, it was shown that giving particulate matter that's very similar to wildfire particulate matter, and also similar to, diesel exhaust and things like that, does cause mitochondrial function in these mice and also can lead to cognitive dysfunction and also lead to even problems with mood. So, emotional regulation. And so when MitoQ was given to these mice, it actually prevented all that from happening. So it kind of maintained your mitochondria in the face of all this wildfire pollution that, it's getting in your lungs, it's getting to your bloodstream. Like, you're not going to really be able to avoid it completely, but this for sure is a way to mitigate the damage. There's another study that came out very recently on microplastics accumulating in our brains. So did you hear about this? Where
I have not heard this study.
They looked at brains, post-mortem, obviously, that had died around 2010, and then also looked at kind of more recent brains and saw that brains, even just kind of, in the last 10 years, are accumulating way more microplastics than they used to. So there's a lot more microplastics in our water and our food. And so what can you do? And so then another interesting study, also preclinical, showed that at least in worms, when you give microplastics to them, kind of found, similar levels to soil in just regular kind of soil, that MitoQ could prevent, once again, mitochondrial dysfunction and also improve kind of brain synapse activity. So like kind of the synapses were working better than they were, when they just got exposed to these microplastics. So that's another example of, if you're worried about microplastics, you can't avoid them, but this is something that you could try to sort of, maintain brain function. And
well, it's interesting because it's maintaining brain function in spite of the presence of, you know what I mean? Like it's not removing the microplastics. And I mean, I think that the person who figures that piece of the puzzle out, who can create some big microplastic magnet that can somehow capture them and drag them out. And even then there'll probably be some problem with tissue damage or whatever the case may be. But what's really interesting about what you're saying is that in the presence of the microplastics, at least it's still very early work. It's in worms, not quite in humans yet, that by giving the mitochondria a better way, a protectant and a way to function better, it can kind of overcome the deficit from the presence of those microplastics. That's pretty wild. I mean, if that continues to play out in your higher life forms and finally gets to the human person. You have a series of different versions of the MitoQ supplement. There's one for eyes, there's one for brain, there's you have all different ones. Is this basically an effort to target, because as we talked about before, you bring on a nutrient like this that is going to affect mitochondria, it's going to go everywhere. It's going to go all over the body, and it's going to go it's going to be taken up where it's needed most. And you might want to really work on your brain or whatever. Now, at the end of the day, you want to work on whatever it is that needs the most work. But can you talk a little bit about these different formulas? Like, is it that you've added nutrients to support those other systems, and that's why there's a MitoQ eyes and a MitoQ heart and whatever, and all the other formulas? Or is it that you've done something to the MitoQ itself to give it a better affinity for different tissues?
All right. So no, it's the same mitoquinol in all of our products. But yeah, as you said, it's really about looking at what other ingredients can address problems with the eye, right? So we know like blue light is a problem. MitoQ is not going to fix that, but it can fix other things about, decreasing oxidative stress that you're getting from blue light or from other things. But, things like lutein can also really help. So a lot of these formulations are about synergy, because you probably believe this too. Like you can't just have a silver bullet, right? MitoQ is not going to do everything. And I am very much a believer in stacking and, assessing what needs to be done to help my mitochondria function better. So whether it's like an NAD booster, whether it's PQQ. So yeah, we're all about putting these formulations together that we think has the most synergy to get the most protection for, the certain region that you're worried about most, but still being aware that you will get a lot of other benefits. And that's kind of what we hear, of course, that people who take MitoQ heart or they take MitoQ joint are like, oh, I noticed that like my energy was improved overall, or I was sleeping better, that kind of thing. So for sure, they're getting all the benefits, but just, getting a little extra help for a certain area.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. Okay. So let's just say, and maybe you can, and maybe it's already happening, but if you could greenlight a longevity focused clinical trial for MitoQ tomorrow, money's no object, there are no obstacles in your way, what would it measure? Like, what unanswered question are you dying to dig into?
Yeah. So I will say I am, just as I pointed out, really into multimodal interventions, right? So I don't want to just say like, take MitoQ and you're all set. It's a good insurance for some things, but I would love to do a multimodal kind of study looking at, MitoQ plus, maybe a Mediterranean diet, plus like a certain amount of exercise, plus maybe even just using something like Noom. So I used to work for Noom, and I really love how Noom made it very easy to set goals. And I think this is really important for a clinical study that we don't always appreciate, especially for complicated ones, is that it's really hard to do a clinical study. There's just a lot of things going on in your life. And something like Noom, where you have an app that kind of keeps objectives and sort of different things you need to do in the day and why you need to do them. So kind of keeping a goal that keeps you emotionally attached to these tasks, that's really important. So we'd love to merge that together. In fact, I know Noom is starting to look at longevity, which is kind of cool.
I know people love Noom. Yeah.
Yeah. So something like that, I think, would be really amazing. But I would especially love to look at brain function during that. And so we do have some studies going on right now looking at mild cognitive impairments, so the precursor to Alzheimer's, but I would love to look at just straight up Alzheimer's, because there's a lot of data coming out that mitochondrial dysfunction might be one of the reasons why we have so much amyloid build up, through this kind of innate immunity response and inflammation building up in the brain. So I would love to be able to get to the heart of that, because we have a lot of preclinical data showing that MitoQ helps the brain. Oh, and one of our products, actually, MitoQ plus curcumin, there's been several preclinical studies showing that particular combination is really good for the brain. And in fact, can increase ATP in synapses of like aged mice and aged rats, which I think is so important. People don't look at stuff like, hey, ATP is actually going down in your brain as you age. How do you bring it up again? Like no one's really addressing that much. And so I think it's amazing that MitoQ can do that. I would love it if we could show that in humans. So
with curcumin.
Yeah, with curcumin. So
that's really interesting, because it's very anti-inflammatory, right? So you wonder is it the combination of bringing more energy to like allowing the mitochondria to produce more energy and suppressing inflammation at the same time?
Exactly.
Right? Because the other situation I'm thinking about is even in the case of a TBI. I don't know if you've looked at traumatic brain injury at all, but we know that when somebody sustains a traumatic brain injury, the immediate effect is this massive inflammation in the brain, coupled with a lack of energy to the neurons. Like you get this. One of the ways I've heard it described, and I don't know if it's accurate, it's that the brain instantly becomes insulin resistant. And so you can't get energy into the brain cells. Then you get on top of that, this big inflammation. And so a lot of the damage from the TBI happens right away, like almost instantly. And so what are the agents we can introduce in a short term that can help to mitigate, I know molecular hydrogen, a lot of people have done some work around molecular hydrogen helping to mitigate some of that inflammation. I wonder if something like the MitoQ with the curcumin might be really one of those things you want to have in your back pocket.
I would definitely have it in my back pocket. So there have been preclinical studies showing that MitoQ has been very effective for traumatic brain injury. And it does make sense, so it does reduce the inflammation, kind of brings back the cognition, faster and kind of more of it. And it's something where I honestly feel like it's like underappreciated as a cause of cognitive decline, even though people are getting more aware of it. All those concussions you get when you're playing sports like soccer or football or whatever, like those are all adding up. So whenever someone gets a bump in the head, I'm like, you should do something about it. Like, don't just sit there, like do something about it. Like probably try to take some antioxidants like maybe MitoQ.
Yeah.
I know omega-3s can be helpful too. So yeah.
Oh, for sure.
I feel like that's another thing.
And then when you were talking about stacking things, have you looked at, or is this on your radar at all, because people talk about a lot of, in this space, a lot of people work with red light and near infrared light. And there's a lot of talk about how those specific light frequencies activate mitochondria. Do you think, would it be interesting? I think it would be fascinating personally to look at putting together, because people will take methylene blue and use red light within a half hour or so as a way to support mitochondrial function. I wonder if, and I'm based on this conversation, I'd be surprised if you didn't see some kind of synergy between the red light and something like MitoQ.
Yeah, it makes sense. And definitely we've talked about it. If someone wants to come to talk to us about doing it, I think I mentioned to you earlier that we fund almost none of our clinical studies. We just have researchers that come to us and they just so believe that MitoQ could be the answer to ALS or multiple sclerosis or congestive heart failure or COPD or PCOS, that they come to us and they're like, we just want to do a trial with MitoQ and we'll pay for it ourselves. We'll get funding ourselves. We would just like to see if you can donate some test products. So yeah, we have so many of those, but we don't always get the full control of what people want to do. So, I always am kind of raising my hand going like, hey, do you want to look at, infrared as well? And, sometimes people are like,
I might have people to introduce you on that front, actually.
If you have people that want to do a great collaboration, I would love to talk to them.
Yeah, even infrared sauna with MitoQ would be really, really interesting. There's so many different things. I'm sure even people listening going, oh, what about this? And what's amazing, what's fabulous here is you have this molecule sitting at the center of so many different things. And so, which I guess is why you have all these researchers reaching out to you going like, can we get some of that stuff so that we can study how it affects our...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what a great position to be in. Okay, so we're gonna start winding down. What have we not touched on that you wanted to talk about today? Is there anything we haven't kind of gone to? I know brain health is based on your story, really, with your grandmother has been it was one of the big drivers that brought you into this field in the first place. Is there anything else we haven't touched on that you kind of really want the audience to know about?
I think one thing I would love people to know about, because you touched upon this earlier, is like, how do you know if your mitochondrial dysfunctioning, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a big problem that I've just gone through many diseases that we think have mitochondrial origins, like diabetes and cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease. But how do you check that? And I would like people to know there's a lot more ways to test your mitochondria than ever before. So For instance, like one thing I always tell people is like, if you're experiencing fatigue that seems unexplained, nothing else seems to be going on in your life, that could be mitochondria. Like literally just even last week, there was a study showing that sleep pressure, the pressure to go to sleep, is caused by mitochondria being less able to control electron transport, sort of buildup of electrons, and that causes sleep. So it's like another indication that if your mitochondria is dysfunctioning, you will feel tired and sleepy and have brain fog. And so then, that's a sign that maybe you should go and get tested. So I'm excited that there are a few new testing kinds of ways, like looking at actual oxidative phosphorylation. So how well your mitochondria kind of complexes are working in terms of making ATP, and then also ATP itself. And so MeScreen, I think, is really great.
I was going to mention them.
They're working on something that is easy to do in your home. You just spot a blood card, you send it off, and then you can find out much more about your mitochondria. There are a lot of interesting new, I would say, kind of mitokines you can get at a standard lab test, from LabQuest. So GDF15, FGF21, that are very indicative of like, are your mitochondria stressed? So GDF15 is a really good example of, hey, if you're seeing that go up, then that could indicate mitochondrial dysfunction. And that actually can indicate that you are probably at risk of many different diseases. And you're probably feeling the brain fog and the fatigue as well, too. So, that's another one.
What was the other marker? FGF20, was it
FGF21, yeah.
FGF21?
Mm-hmm.
So both of these markers, if they're elevated, both would be an indication that it might be worth it to look a little deeper into mitochondria.
Look a little deeper and maybe try a mitochondrial therapeutic, right? So that's, I think, where everyone's looking over causes of disease that are easy to measure, right? So it's like, Alzheimer's, like, let's look at amyloid because that's really easy to measure. But I am so frustrated by the fact that if we had some good way to measure mitochondria, a lot of the work of Alzheimer's might have gone differently as it has gone for like the last 20 years. And so having these tests available, getting people more aware of their mitochondria. And I know sometimes people feel like mitochondria is super scary. Like there's so many complexes. How does it all work? But it's really easy to break it down in terms of, the more energy you're producing, the more oxidative stress you're producing, and that can cause damage. And so it's really about balancing out energy to have better longevity, to have a better health span. So that's why I always tell people it's not about like revving up your mitochondria to some crazy amount. It's having just the right amount of ATP, the energy that you need. We talked about obesity is a really good example of that, but not having these revved up mitochondria. They're now spewing out oxidative stress that are now going to cause inflammation. So that's another thing I would love for people to understand more is just how important mitochondria are behind many different mechanisms they didn't realize.
As you know, I spend a lot of my time in the peptide space, and you're, I'm sure, well aware of MOTC as a mitochondrial peptide. And people come to me often and go, well, I want to do a run of MOTC. And I'm like, well, until you know that your mitochondria are in decent shape, MOTC might just be, it's like the equivalent of getting into a car with an engine that's really not running very well. It maybe needs oil, maybe needs a tune-up, and just flooring the accelerator pedal. You could end up doing more damage than good. You might get a little more power out of it in the short term, but you may end up doing more harm than good. Where I see that, so I will often recommend, if they're going to think about that, which is already kind of pretty bleeding edge because it's not actually approved for human use. So it's already, if you're going to go that way, then you better spend some time taking care of your mitochondria first to try and get them into a better space. And, something like a MitoQ might be a good thing to run alongside or think about before. And maybe you won't even need it, right? Like maybe something like a mitoquinol might enhance your energy system in the mitochondria so much that you don't feel the need to go using something that is so experimental on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great thing to just try if you do feel like there could be something going on, but it's even better if you have some way to show that your mitochondria are getting a little bit more healthy, kind of everything's being squared away. There's one last study I want to mention just because it just came out and I think it's kind of cool. So another area where mitochondrial dysfunction occurs that people are not aware of is postmenopause, right? So when we lose estrogen during perimenopause, this is really affecting how well our mitochondria can work. And so we had a recent study actually showing that even just women who had late versus normal menopause, people who have late menopause have way better vascular function related to their mitochondrial function, right? So, having that extra estrogen on for even a few more years is way better for their vascular health. And what was cool is during that same study, they just gave one rather large dose of MitoQ just to see if that could help vascular function of women that had gone through menopause and had no more estrogen. And they showed it actually kind of brought their vascular sort of function back to premenopause state. So
with one dose?
With one dose. So it's not a dose I would recommend. It was 160 milligrams, so people should not take that on their own. They're now doing a study where they're looking at 20 milligrams over a long term, which makes more sense to me. But I just thought it was really cool that they could
That's amazing.
Get vascular function back to that kind of, the way it used to be before you lost all your estrogen, before you went through menopause. So another thing that people should be aware of is just mitochondrial function after menopause. It's going to be a problem. It's going to link to many other diseases and risk of these diseases. Be good to just check that out.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, seeing as you've brought up menopause, I have to ask you about fertility because the ovaries are incredibly dense in mitochondria. Have you done any work there yet, or is that just kind of on your radar at some point? Or has somebody done work on it? Because you would think that those researchers who are like, how do we optimize the mitochondria in the ovaries? Because we know that that is a problem that can be a fertility issue. And even the testes, I guess, on the male side would have to be very dense in mitochondria. Has any research happened in that area yet, or is that still to come?
So some research has happened. So a lot of preclinical models of showing that ovarian function can be improved with MitoQ, that oocytes, so the eggs harvested for IVF, for instance, are kind of higher quality and, have better implantation when they have MitoQ in media. So a lot of indications like that. That's actually been done with human eggs as well, too. And so this is, I think, where I would love it if someone wanted to look at this further. We have a lot of fertility clinics telling us that they really think it's a great thing to give to people before their IVF, before they're actually harvesting eggs up until, implantation. So I would love it. So if someone wants to talk to us about that, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I think somebody will. I can think of a person who does. So I'm on it. All right. So as we start to wrap up, just a couple of quick questions, just a little bit of rapid fire. What's one longevity tool you use every day besides MitoQ? We know you use MitoQ, but
what else do I use? I use a bunch of things. I mean, I love omega-3s. I take that every day. I love N-acetylcysteine with glycine, take that every day. I am a big fan of collagen, not for the skin health benefits. I'm not too sure if I ever really saw anything going on with my skin, but for the joint health benefits. So I'm a big runner. And if I don't take collagen every day, I start to notice my knees hurting. And so I take, at least 10 grams of collagen to just prevent that. So that's, I think, another really great one that, people think of it as skin, but no, your joints are important too, especially exercise.
For sure. What's a study that changed how you view aging? Is there one study that kind of changed your perspective on aging?
This is going to be a funny study. This is actually a study that I heard about when I was a postdoc, and this was in worms. But what I thought was really interesting was that they're looking at worms and looking at calorie restriction, right? And kind of expecting to see a lifespan effect. But one of the studies they did not see any lifespan effect, so the worms were not getting any benefit. And they realized it was because the worms were near food. So they were still restricted from calories, but being able to sense the food, being able to be around the food made it so all the calorie restriction benefits of lifespan enhancement went away. And I find that so interesting. And I wonder if this is not something we should think about more as humans as well. We all try to, keep our metabolism like really good and all the rest. But, being exposed to all this food and smelling it and all that, I don't know if it revs up our, kind of metabolism in the wrong way or just what, but I thought that was really interesting. So it's something to think about. I'm against open kitchens. How about that? Open kitchens are a bad idea.
I mean, mitochondria act as energy sensors in the body, right? Like they pick up. I wonder if they could be. That's so interesting. Like you don't even have that, and depressing. Like you don't even have to eat the food to get affected by it. That's actually really depressing.
Well, I mean, it's just one more thing that we have to consider about like lifespan. It's not is so easy, but just, there's other things to consider. So for sure.
Stay out of the darn kitchen.
It can be fixed. Yeah.
Yeah. Stay away from the kitchen. All right. I think you may have mentioned it earlier, but what's your favorite mitochondrial biomarker?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think just really understanding like if you're making the ATP, if you're making the oxidative stress the way that is detrimental to your health, like you should know that. So something like MeScreen really makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really cool test. We'll put, you know what, guys, we'll put a link to the podcast that we released with MeScreen last year and a link in there. Okay. Last question of the day before we let you go and start your day. There's now sunshine outside, so hopefully it's a little warmer in your office. What does aging with power mean to you personally?
I think aging with power is a little bit what I talked about before, is aging with a strong goal. And so I recently went to a conference where people were asked, who wants to live to 100? And almost no one raised their hand because I think they picture it as just being decrepit and kind of just being miserable. And I want to think about aging with power is like, I am 95, I am 100, and I am feeling very dynamic. I have goals. I love reading about centenarians that are like very into their lives. I find that that's not depressing. That is very inspiring. So, having that goal, like I'm getting up and I'm going to go work at Home Depot at age 105. Like, I'm like, yeah, go do that, go and engage. So Purpose. That is aging with power.
I love it. Purpose. I love that. So you have 2 dosages available of this MitoQ. What is the optimal dose that people should be aiming for on a daily basis? And is this an everyday, all the time supplement, or is it something that you would say people should take for a little while and then take a break? Like, I'm just asking for your personal opinion. If I'm your sister and I'm telling you, all right, Siobhan, what do I really need to do here? What would you should suggest I do?
Oh, all right. I'll tell you what I told my sister. I think that the 10 milligram dose is a great maintenance dose, right? So just kind of giving your mitochondria that protection. Maybe you're not feeling like you're super stressed in life or that you have like an actual disease that you're worried about, but it's just that kind of prevention of that feeling like it might start happening at some point. The 20 milligram dose is kind of more about, you have a health issue and you think it might be linked to mitochondria, or just that you have, pretty bad fatigue. And this is something that probably, you should try to see if you can fix that. Like, who wants to live that way? So 20 milligrams is kind of like our HCP, our healthcare practitioner kind of product. So usually it's available through a doctor or a practitioner. But yeah, like the 10 milligram dose, I think is also great for a lot of different things as well too.
Amazing. And people can always double down on the 10 milligram if they want to feel a difference.
Yes.
Well, Siobhan, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for getting up again at the crack of dawn to talk to me at the end of my day. It's an absolute pleasure. Can you please let people know where they can find out more about MitoQ and your work?
Yeah, so the MitoQ website's easy. It's mitoq.com, MITOQ.com. All the information about products is there. If you want to hear more about the research, you can also try mcrp.net. That's where we have collaborations with researchers to do more clinical studies or preclinical studies. So another great resource.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you again so much for taking the time. And folks, there's going to be a code and link special for you in the show notes for you to save some money on at least your first order of MitoQ, because I know that Siobhan was just saying to me, she just wants to get it out to all the people that could possibly benefit. So Siobhan, thank you again so much. What is the website for MitoQ, just as a final reminder?
Yeah, it's mitoq.com.
Easy.
Yeah.
I love it. Keep it simple. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day. And thanks everybody for being here with us.
Thank you.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider.